This past week, the Pentagon's AI deal blew up in everyone's face. Sam Altman admitted he rushed it, Dario Amodei called it safety theater, and ChatGPT uninstalls spiked nearly 300%.
Jack Dorsey cut half of Block's workforce and told every other CEO they're next. And the stock jumped 24%.
OpenAI dropped GPT 5.4 with native computer use, and it outsourced humans on desktop navigation.
Meanwhile, 3 other model releases landed in the same week, and none of them were trying to be smarter, just faster, cheaper, and smaller. Oh, and OpenAI raised $110 billion.
It's been a week.
It's been a week, and now it's time for all the AI news you need to know in 30 minutes or less.
Here we go. Oh my gosh, what a week, as you just said. So we have to come back to the Pentagon story, the AI soap opera, as I like to call it this
Total
week.
soap opera.
Yeah, and this last week, it really turned into something I think none of us expected. So if you've been following along, we left off last, here with, what's going to happen after Dario Amodei came and said he's not going to sign the deal. Well, after that, more news enveloped. So let's just go back to the beginning. 2 weeks ago, we covered the policy shift. Last week, contract announcement. This week, there was fallout.
Yes, a lot of fallout. And honestly, it's still coming. I have a feeling this may be the top story next week too, because the hits keep coming.
It really is. It's ongoing and real time. So here's what happened. After OpenAI signed the Pentagon deal worth up to $200 million, they announced hours after that the Trump administration blacklisted Anthropic. So they came out and said nobody in the government can use Anthropic. And we got a pretty clear public response, immediate and measurable. ChatGPT uninstalls spiked 295% after they announced that they signed that deal. Their 1-star app reviews jumped 775% over the weekend. And then Claude hit number 1 on the US App Store. And that was the first time that happened for Claude.
Yeah, I mean, pretty crazy. And it wasn't just users, right? OpenAI employees were pushing back internally. There were public statements, petitions. CNN reported that some of the staff were, quote, fuming over this whole thing. It wasn't just a public perception thing. It was also an internal problem for them.
Yeah, people are not happy about this internally or externally. And then 2 things happened that sort of changed the shape of the story after that, as if this wasn't already kind of spicy enough. Sam Altman went public and he admitted that the deal looked opportunistic and sloppy, which made me laugh because right before he announced the deal, he announced that he thought that Dario Amodei was doing the right thing, standing up for safety. And then it seemed like only a couple of hours later, he was like, but we signed the deal. So that was weird. So he said, you know what, I shouldn't have rushed this. And then OpenAI immediately started renegotiating the deal to add stronger language around anti-surveillance, which is, of course, what Dario Amodei had asked for in the first place.
I read this other contract. Let's take some language from that one and put it in here. It'll be all better.
Oh, my goodness. I know.
So this was interesting. And he really did, he used that phrase, sloppy and opportunistic, which is pretty bad admission for how your own negotiation process worked. Doesn't bode well for them, I think.
Yeah. And so then, of course, we now saw Sam's reaction. Then more drama unfolds. We get to see Dario Amodei's reaction because an internal memo leaked, and it was not his most diplomatic words. He called OpenAI's public messaging around the deal straight up lies. And he described their safety commitments as safety theater. So those are pretty charged language there. And basically his argument was that Anthropic demanded binding contract language, no domestic surveillance, no autonomous weapons, and the Pentagon refused. But then OpenAI turned around, accepted the deal without those contract protections, relying on the Pentagon, to follow applicable laws.
Yeah, I think legal experts were quick to point out that may not be the best protection. And the contract language says that AI shall not be intentionally used for domestic service, but intentionally is carrying a lot of water in that sentence.
Yeah, it's doing a lot of work. And the full contract text was never actually released publicly, so we don't get to, junior lawyer opine on it. But OpenAI is on somewhat shaky ground. And in addition, the Department of War officially designated Anthropic as a supply chain risk, a first for any American company. And Anthropic is suing them over the designation, which honestly feels like it might be overkill, but
The
there you
whole
go.
thing is crazy. Like I think Anthropic's overreaching a bit. The DOW is responding inappropriately. It reminded me of, for the Bridgerton fans out there, there was a scene, two parties bickering in front of a judge. The judge went, "You guys need to go in private and settle this thing because it's just embarrassing for everybody to watch this thing play out in a court. Like just figure this out and don't come back." And I feel like that's what these guys need to do. They need to go sit down in a room and honestly, when you look at where they are, I don't think they're that far apart. Anthropic and the DOW are kind of fine. And to be honest, they signed a contract with more restrictive terms in June of last year. And they've already been loosened. So the whole supply chain risk feels like such overkill for where these two companies are. It's a designation that's never been used against an American company ever. It's always like Chinese companies that are stealing state secrets and sending them to the CCP. And now we're like treating Anthropic, the leading, arguably AI company in the country, that way. It just seems crazy.
It is definitely crazy. I think anytime that you can compare what is happening in our federal government to Bridgerton, you have to say it's a little crazy.
Well, crazy's been the MO for this administration and a number of things, but this one just feels like everybody's the security theater. It feels like contract theater, like everybody's not being quite ingenuous with what their concerns are. And I do think there's a very real point the Department of War makes that's very fair, which is when it comes down to, is a technology ready to be used in a certain context? That really is a decision that has to be left to the government with some accountability, some rules, and the ability to make real-time decisions in the context of war, which we happen to be in the middle of, about when and where those technologies that may not be fully mature may be a better trade-off than the risk of not using an immature technology. And that's just a trade-off that nobody elected anyone in Anthropic to make. And whether you like the people in charge of the government right now or not, it's probably a decision that needs to be left in the hands of the government. And then if you don't like their decisions, that's what elections are for.
That's right. And, the other angle on this story that I think is pretty fascinating to think is that, executives talk a lot about brand trust and sort of loyalty and that type of stuff, but it's kind of hard to measure that stuff. So this was a very interesting time where we got some actual specific metrics and data around the loss of brand trust in like immediate uninstall rates, immediate app store rankings, employee retention risk. And so that was a really interesting thing to think about. And if your company uses ChatGPT or Claude, then this decision sort of lands on your desk too, right? It's how's your employees feel about that? So
yeah, the very real brand implications were interesting. I think unrelated, but Anthropic had released last week a tool to import your memories from ChatGPT. So there's like a prompt you give ChatGPT, it'll spit all the memories, you plug it into Claude, and it'll bring all your information over. I don't think that was intended for this use case, but man, what good timing for them to have that released this week. I did use that to bring over whatever I had used to have in ChatGPT over into Claude.
So it did definitely feel like, speaking of opportunistic, right?
It felt very well timed. But I also think there's real risk. I mean, it's a fascinating example of, from a public perception point of view, this has probably done Anthropic a lot of good. From a negotiating with the Department of War point of view, having a big public win against the Department of War and their stance probably does not, even though it's nothing Anthropic necessarily did to drive that user reaction, the employee reaction, probably doesn't help when the DOW is trying to find a way probably to negotiate an out that looks like a win. Well, that win looks a lot harder to get now that Anthropic is out there with the big W in terms of installs.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, let's shift gears to a workforce story that landed like a bomb this last week. Jack Dorsey, Block, the CEO of Block, parent company of Square and the Cash App, cut roughly, wait for it, 4,000 employees, nearly half the company gone in a single announcement.
Yeah, that's interesting timing too, because Block's business is pretty strong. And so this is a little bit unusual to see such a drastic cut when their fundamentals are pretty good.
That's right. I mean, like that was what made this so interesting, right? This isn't a crisis. They're not seeing huge declines in revenue and needing to figure out their P&L. Dorsey said explicitly, we're not making this decision because we're in trouble. Our business is strong. Q4 gross profit was up 24% year over year. Cash App profit was up 33%. They beat analyst estimates. And then the stock surged another 24% on the news of massive layoffs.
Yeah. So the market liked it. They liked cutting people while profits are up.
I mean, to be fair, the market usually likes both profits being up and cutting people. So it seemed like a no-winner. But that sends a pretty big signal to any public company CEO who's watching, right? Dorsey framed this as ripping off the Band-Aid. His argument is that smaller teams plus AI will be more productive, equal more output. And the gradual cuts were far worse for morale than making one focused, decisive move. And so that's what he did.
I mean, I think that he makes a good point there. I think the other point that he didn't make explicitly, but I think is something for people to think about is how much will your employees actually lean into using AI and becoming more productive with it if they don't need to? And so having this sort of forced scarcity to force them into changing habits, I think I have to imagine as part of the strategy, even if he didn't say it, because it would make him sound not so nice. But one question I have is like, how much of this is actually because of AI? Like, Block grew from about 3,800 employees pre-pandemic to over 10,000. So that's like exponential growth, like something like 160% increase in headcount. So is this really like restructuring because of AI, or is it just like, well, we got to clean up? We maybe went a little crazy during the pandemic.
In my household, there's a phrase that I use a lot with my kids, which is both can be true. And this feels like a both can be true moment, right? That's probably both. Of course, the AI narrative, it very conveniently covers both. Dorsey did, I mean, they are spinning the narrative of this being AI driven. Dorsey said something happened in December of last year when when models became, quote, an order of magnitude more capable. So he's clearly trying to frame this as an inflection point for AI. But it's also true that many tech companies have realized that they had, during the boom years, grown substantially their headcount and probably could get by with many fewer people. A point of view that Elon Musk maybe took to the extreme over at X or Twitter, without nearly the dramatic death knell of the product that many people had predicted. So I do think there's probably a little bit of, we probably had more people than we needed absent AI, and with AI even more so. And let's just like clean the whole thing up at once and be done with it.
Yeah. And I think the other sort of red flag for me is, remember we talked about Harvard Business Review a couple of weeks ago, and they found that really only 2% of companies have made layoffs tied to actual measured productivity gains.
Yeah.
The other 98% are cutting based on like anticipated productivity gains.
Yep.
So it's the idea that AI is going to replace work, but not actually with like proof that it is already.
Yeah, Dorsey went a little farther than that. I mean, he clearly is getting ahead of what the real productivity to the perceived. But he said, and I'm paraphrasing, that most companies are late, right? And within the next year, he thinks the majority of companies will reach the same conclusion and make similar structural changes. So there's I don't know if that one's on the Kalshi prediction markets yet, but Jack claiming that a lot of public companies can be massive layoffs in the next 12 months, which I don't know that that's true, but that's what he's guessing.
Yeah. So I guess the question is like, if CEOs follow Dorsey's lead within a year, is that going to be because AI was genuinely transformative, or is it because sort of the narrative became self-fulfilling? We don't know the answer, but
I know that you'll ever know, but it certainly makes me, as you see all these things happen, and you and I have kids of the age that are going to enter the workforce soon and are building the skills that will make them employable or not. Right now, it really begs the question: what are the skills a young person should be building, an early career person, high school or college student, that are going to be relevant in a world where AI is driving massive productivity gains, and therefore, at least in established companies with large workforces, pretty large layoffs.
Yeah, that definitely keeps me up at night as a parent, and also just as a employer. Also, like I think about, okay, if all these young people that I start to hire in the future have only ever used AI and they can't back up to analog methods if things go off the rails, is it just going to be like you have to search around the office and find an elder to do math because the kids can't do it anymore? Like that's like a thing that would not be great for us, and I'm a little bit worried about it.
Yeah, I'm worried about it, but I also am optimistic. I just look at, I think the opportunity for new businesses and growth is really massive, like the opportunity to do more with less. And I just look at my kids and go, man, you just need to, like, you will enter your entry-level job as a manager of AIs. Nobody starts as a manager normally, but now you will be an entry-level individual contributor who manages a bunch of AIs to get work done. And if you aren't good at that, it doesn't matter how good you are at the math, right? Or the other, like those things are important to understand. But if you can't manage AIs to get more work done than the next person, well, then you're going to be at a real disadvantage. That's at least something as I play with Claude Code up late at night because I'm too excited by what I can do with it. I go, this is a skill set that these kids need to be developing, how to do more with these tools.
Yeah, for sure.
All right. Well, if you're finding this content useful, or you just want to be the person at work who actually knows what's happening in AI, hit subscribe wherever you're listening. And as a little tidbit, we also begun taking some of the videos from our AI and financial services course that used to be behind a subscription and paywall, and putting them onto our YouTube channel. So if you're looking for an introduction to how AI technologies work or how they're being applied in financial services, go check out the YouTube channel and you can see those videos for free.
So cool. Well, while OpenAI was dealing with the whole Pentagon fallout debacle, they also shipped a product update. So good news there. GPT 5.4 dropped this past week in 3 tiers. We haven't talked about the tiers in a while. That used to be a hot thing, but
Yeah.
you got 3 tiers: standard, thinking, and pro. And the headline feature is native computer use.
Yeah, meaning the model can navigate the desktop, operate websites, control applications, keyboard, mouse, the whole kit and caboodle, and it seems to be pretty good.
The whole
Oh,
thing. And it's not a research preview. It's not a demo. It's actually baked into the flagship model. On the OS World benchmark for desktop navigation, it scored 75%, which actually interestingly exceeds the human baseline of 72.4%. So there you go.
it exceeds human performance is one of those phrases that maybe sounds bigger than it might actually be. It's a pretty specific benchmark on a specific task, but it is interesting. Although I will say, I want to know who the humans they benchmark are, because I've definitely seen some humans where I think maybe not the most impressive benchmark that you can navigate a desktop computer better than those humans.
I was going to say it's always a question of which humans you're benchmarking against, but
Right.
number I think actually matters a little bit more for your audience is the token efficiency improvement. GPT 5.4 uses 47% fewer tokens on multi-tool workflows. So they tested this across 250 tasks, 36 different tool integrations. And for anyone running agents at enterprise scale, that's a cost per task improvement that really can change your math.
Totally. I mean, there's a lot of focus, and we'll have this in some of our other model updates on efficiency, density of intelligence around the model. So that's a pretty big change. Maybe as important as the increase in intelligence or the agentic capabilities. All right. Well, let's get to those other model updates. There were a bunch this week, and we'll just the other one's not as interesting. So we're going to go rapid fire style. We got 3 other releases. And the interesting thing to me was none of them were really claiming to be the smartest model. They were all attacking it from different angles, which was really interesting.
That in itself is a story.
It really is. I mean, maybe it marks this moment where we've reached the point where, more intelligence for most people, not helpful. So let's start up first. OpenAI, in addition to ChatGPT 5.4 standard, thinking, and pro, they launched 5.3 instant. Guys, these naming conventions really pretty bad. This one is a conversational update, so not really smarter, just less annoying, less sycophantic, I guess. Nearly 27% fewer hallucinations, fewer of those canned phrases like stop, take a breath, fewer unnecessary refusals. They're kind of optimizing for how the model talks and not so much how well it thinks. So it was interesting. It's kind of a vibe update, this one.
I absolutely love it. It's like, didn't update the IQ, but hopefully updated the EQ a little bit. They're not like, great job, great thought. And you're like, no, what? Yeah.
Don't tell us they did a great job, though. I might learn the lesson to go back to the old way. So we're going to say, just thumbs up, little stoic dad response to the model update for ChatGPT, so doesn't learn the wrong lesson. Next up, Google shipped Gemini 3.1 flashlight. Again, how many words can you put into a description? I don't know. This one was all about speed and cost. 2.5 times faster than Gemini 2.5 Flash, 45% faster in output, and it costs 1/8 what Gemini Pro costs. 250,000 input tokens, so pretty good context window. And it has this interesting feature called thinking levels. Developers can dial up or down how much reasoning the model does before generating output. So you can trade speed for depth on a per request basis as a developer. So again, not really focused on maximizing intelligence, but different kinds of efficiency models there.
For sure. I think that people have to think carefully about how they use, when they use the fast and shallow approach versus the slow and thorough approach. So we don't, flood everyone's content with AI slop.
Well, the AI slot people probably going to pick the fast and bad because, by very definition, they're not doing, they like the cheap, right? Yeah. The last one I found pretty interesting as well. Alibaba released Qwen 3.5 small. Again, we got numbers, we got descriptors, the whole thing in these models. This is a family of 4 models ranging from 800 million to 9 billion parameters, all designed to run on your laptop or phone. No clouds. You don't got to dial in through an API. And the 9 billion parameter model scored 81.7 on the GPQA Diamond benchmark, beating OpenAI's 120 billion parameter model. That's more than 10 times the parameter efficiency.
A model that is 10 times smaller, outperforming on reasoning benchmarks, and it's open source.
This is what we've been seeing, right? This is the trend. And Elon Musk, who obviously runs his own AI company, called it impressive intelligence density. And I love that phrase, I got to say. I think it really captures what's happening across all these releases. We're not anymore just racing towards bigger, better models. We're optimizing along a bunch of other axes, from style to speed to cost to density. How much intelligence can I fit into a model of a particular size? So really interesting to see that shift in the announcements we've got.
Yeah, and I think like the big question that we used to be asking ourselves, at the executive level is like, which model is the smartest and going to be the best? But actually now the best is not going to maybe be defined by the smartest, but it's which one actually fits our specific workflow requirements and is like cost effective and fast enough to actually operationalize, because that's such a huge part of the equation. It's not just smarts, it's cost effectiveness, it's speed, it's accuracy, it's all three things.
Yeah, it's gonna. I mean, we've talked about for a while the capability overhang, the concept that the models are more capable than the way they're being used. Um, these things really increase the number of places and the ease with which you can deploy these models into context where you see that capability overhang. So I'm optimistic that these are all really great things for increasing the adoption of these models. I mean, I still think we follow the model updates. We will keep doing that for the audience, but I think a lot of the story is increasingly going to be how are people able to actually deploy these in the real world, and speed, latency, cost, efficiency all matter as much at this point as probably raw intelligence in terms of increasing people's ability to companies, organizations to really adopt these technologies at scale.
Yeah, I think that's right. So we have one more OpenAI story to cover, and this one is purely about scale. So this past week, OpenAI closed a $110 billion funding round. I know you're asking yourself, what else is new? They're like closing these things all the time. But it's the largest private raise in history. So current valuation is now up to $840 billion.
I mean, it's crazy. I remember being at Google and evaluating my stock and thinking no one's ever going to be $1 trillion company. So there's only so much upside in this equity I've been given, because like, who's going to cross $1 trillion? Now we're talking about somebody closing in on $1 trillion as a private company.
Yeah, it's
crazy. And they didn't just raise money; they raised it from interesting folks, right? Amazon put in 50 billion, Nvidia put in 30 billion, SoftBank. It's like me and my buddies collecting money for the night out. I'll toss in 50, you toss in 30, but we're talking billions of dollars. It's nice to have other buddies. And Amazon becomes the exclusive third-party cloud provider. That deal alone could be worth 100 billion or something over the next couple of years. So it's just a lot of investment.
A lot of investment. And the money is earmarked for what they're calling Stargate class data centers. Their target is 600 billion in total compute spending through 2030. This is OpenAI really betting everything on scaling laws. The idea is that more compute equals smarter models.
Yeah, so they're going to keep investing in these data centers. I hope the 295% increase in uninstall rate doesn't make that a poor choice. Although, with all of these spending numbers, it's so interesting. They tell you what they're going to spend over some period of years. They're very rarely contractually obligated or even necessarily prepared physically to actually, you got to buy the land, you got to build the buildings, you got to find the contract workers to raise the ground. There's a lot of stuff to do to make that money spendable and build that infrastructure. So we'll see if that all comes to bear, but it's, it'll be interesting to see, because there's certainly a lot of large commitments being made.
Yeah. Very interesting to see. So that's the story of OpenAI's week in one sentence. Interesting. The biggest funding round in history, a Pentagon deal that backfired, 2 model releases, and GPT 5.4 in 7 days.
See, when we started this podcast, Annie, I thought, is there going to be enough news to fill a podcast every week? And now OpenAI could do the whole thing in 7 days, just enough news to talk about all the crazy stuff they do, let alone what Anthropic's doing and what Block is doing, everything else. So I every week I worry there won't be enough stories, and every week by Wednesday I've got too many to fill.
That's incredible.
Well, that's our show for this week. If you know someone who would find this useful, share the episode. We're on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you listen.
And if you want to catch up on the Pentagon saga from the beginning, episodes 66 and 67 have the full arc. We'll see you next week.
See you next week.